All right, so today we're diving deep into ethical witchcraft.
Okay.
And we're pulling some insights from this article called Ethical Witchcraft, Respecting Cultures and Traditions.
Right.
And I think this is really important, especially if you're someone who's maybe new to witchcraft.
Yeah, definitely.
It's really having a moment right now.
It is.
It's everywhere, and it's so cool to see it kind of, like having this resurgence.
Yeah, it's great.
But I think because of that, it also means that we need to be extra careful about how we approach it, right?
Right.
We want to be sure that, our practice is powerful, but it's also respectful.
Definitely. And, the article really talks about this and talks about the importance of honoring those traditions and where they come from and respecting where they originated.
Yeah.
And really thinking about the impact that our practice has on communities, especially marginalized communities. And, it talks about approaching magic with integrity.
I love that.
You
One of the things that the article really digs into is this idea of cultural appropriation versus appreciation.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, what are some of the things that you think people should be aware of when it comes to appropriation in witchcraft?
Yeah. So, the article points out some really important red flags to watch out for.
Okay.
And one of the big ones is using practices or symbols from what's called closed traditions without permission.
Okay.
And closed traditions are essentially traditions that require initiation or they require lineage or
Yeah.
very specific cultural ties.
So, you wouldn't just, start performing a Native American smudging ceremony because you read about it in a book.
Exactly.
That feels very much like you're borrowing something that's not yours to borrow.
Exactly. And those are, indigenous smudging and things like hoodoo and voodoo and certain types of shamanism.
Yeah.
These are all examples of closed traditions. And it's not to say that these traditions are better or more powerful or anything like that. But it's about understanding their cultural significance and the importance of, respecting boundaries.
All right.
And really, the article encourages people to do their research and understand the origins of different practices.
Yeah.
You know?
It's about appreciating and learning, not just grabbing whatever seems trendy.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So then what about open traditions then?
Yeah.
What are some examples of those?
So open traditions, think about kitchen witchcraft, lunar magic, sigil magic, even something like tarot.
Okay.
These are generally considered more open and accessible to people from various backgrounds. And it's a great way to kind of, for someone who's exploring witchcraft, they're figuring out what resonates with them.
Totally.
That can be a really good starting point.
Yeah. I've actually been trying out some kitchen witchcraft myself.
Oh, cool.
It's amazing how you can just kind of infuse everyday activities with magic.
Yeah, it's great.
Okay. So we've talked about being mindful of cultural appropriation and respecting those closed traditions.
Yeah.
But there's also this whole other ethical aspect to consider when it comes to spellwork itself, right?
Absolutely. And the article touches on several key areas here, and it mentions consent. It mentions money magic,
Okay.
sustainability, and ethical sourcing.
Okay. Let's unpack those.
Yeah.
So consent. Why is that so crucial when we're talking about magic?
Yeah.
It's not like we're physically doing something to someone, right?
Right. But magic is still about influencing energy and outcomes.
Yeah.
When you're casting a spell,
Mhm.
you're directing your intention. You're directing your will toward a specific goal.
Okay.
And, when other people are involved, trying to influence them without their consent
Mm-hmm.
gets really ethically tricky. And the article uses love spells as a prime example of this.
Yeah, trying to magically force someone to fall in love with you.
Exact.
That definitely feels like crossing a line.
Yeah, it disregards their free will, their agency.
Mm-hmm.
And whether you're doing it through magic or any other means, that's not okay.
Right. So if you're looking for love, maybe a better approach would be to focus on self-love.
Yes.
Right, attracting a healthy relationship through your own energy.
Yeah.
Rather than trying to manipulate someone else's.
Exactly. And, self-love rituals can be so powerful, for boosting your confidence, for embracing your worthiness.
Yeah.
And for attracting, positive relationships into your life.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not messing with anyone's free will.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah.
So moving on then to money magic.
Okay.
A lot of people are, interested in attracting abundance, which is totally understandable.
Of course.
So what are the ethical considerations that we need to be aware of in that realm?
I think it's crucial to distinguish between manifesting abundance for yourself and exploiting others for financial gain.
Okay.
And the article really emphasizes, attracting prosperity through your own efforts and opportunities, not by, taking from others.
So it's not about like trying to magically win the lottery or get rich quick schemes.
Exactly. It's about aligning your energy with abundance and attracting it through ethical means.
Yeah.
Whether that's, hard work or smart investments, or even just being open to receiving,
All right.
unexpected blessings.
I'm sensing a theme here.
Yeah.
Ethical witchcraft is about working with the universe, not trying to force it into submission.
Right.
And speaking of working with the universe, what about sustainability?
Okay.
How does that tie into ethical witchcraft?
Sustainability is about recognizing that our magical practices are intertwined with the well-being of the planet. We need to be mindful of, where our materials come from, how we use them, and how our actions impact the environment.
So like, remembering that over-harvesting white sage, even though it's become a very popular practice, can actually harm ecosystems and disrespect indigenous communities.
Exactly, and it's about finding alternatives that are just as effective, but don't have the same negative impact. So the article mentioned things like rosemary, cedar, lavender. These are all great options for, cleansing your space without harming the environment or appropriating those sacred practices.
Yeah.
You know?
I'm actually really curious about this idea of ethical alternatives.
Yeah.
It feels like a way to empower yourself and be respectful of the planet.
Exactly.
What are some other examples of ethical alternatives for common witchcraft practices?
Well, take crystals, for instance.
Okay.
Instead of, buying mass-produced crystals that might be sourced unethically, you can look for crystals from local or sustainable suppliers. Or even consider using found objects.
Interesting.
Like stones or shells from nature.
Okay.
It's about being mindful of the energy that you're bringing into your practice.
I never even thought about like the ethics of where my crystals come from.
Yeah.
But it totally makes sense.
And the same principle applies to, other materials as well, herbs, candles, essential oils, anything you incorporate into your practice.
Yeah.
It's about being a conscious consumer and supporting businesses that align with your values.
Yeah. So it's about being intentional with every aspect of our practice.
Yeah.
From the spells we cast to the ingredients we use. It's about taking responsibility for the energy we're putting out to the world.
Exactly. And that leads us to the final point the article makes, ethical sourcing. It's all connected.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
So what does ethical sourcing actually look like in practice?
Yeah.
What should we be considering when we're buying materials for our craft?
It starts with asking questions like, where did these materials come from?
Right.
Were they produced sustainably? Are the people involved in their production treated fairly?
Yeah.
Are you supporting businesses that prioritize ethical practices? These are all important things to consider.
Wow, there's so much more to ethical witchcraft than I initially realized.
Yeah.
It's not just about casting spells.
It's a lifestyle.
It's about making conscious choices in every aspect of our practice.
Right.
And thinking about the impact that those choices have on the world around us.
Yeah. It's about aligning your actions with your values both on and off the altar.
Okay, so we've covered cultural respect, spellwork, ethical sourcing.
Yeah.
But what about the witchcraft community itself?
Okay.
How does ethics play a role there?
Building an inclusive and supportive community is absolutely vital, especially considering that, witchcraft has historically been a haven for those who have been marginalized.
Right.
It's about creating a space where everyone feels welcome, respected, and empowered to explore their own path.
I love that.
Yeah.
So how can we, as individuals, promote ethical witchcraft within the larger community?
So the article highlights some really actionable steps that we can take.
Okay.
And one of the most important is uplifting diverse voices.
Okay.
And that means, supporting and learning from practitioners from all backgrounds, BIPOC practitioners, LGBTQ plus practitioners, disabled practitioners, and those who may have been historically excluded or marginalized within the witchcraft community.
So it's not enough to just say, oh, I'm not racist or homophobic.
Right.
Right. It's about actually seeking out diverse perspectives, learning from them, amplifying their voices.
Exactly. And it's also about calling out misinformation.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to closed traditions. Sure. If you see someone perpetuating harmful stereotypes or appropriating practices that aren't theirs to take, it's important to speak up and educate them.
Yeah. It's about being an ally and an advocate for those who might not have the same platform or voice.
Right.
Wow. I'm realizing how much intentionality is required for ethical witchcraft.
Yeah.
It's not just about following rules. It's about actively creating a more just and inclusive community.
It's about recognizing that we're all in this together. We're all learning and growing, and we need to support each other along the way.
I love that sentiment.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, and I think we've laid a really solid foundation for understanding what ethical witchcraft looks like.
Yeah.
But there's one more piece of the puzzle that I want to address, and that's the role of self-love in ethical witchcraft.
Oh, that's a good one.
Right. Because as we've been discussing, ethical witchcraft is not about manipulating others or forcing outcomes. It's about aligning our intentions with our values.
Right.
And using our magic to create positive change in the world.
Yeah.
And I think that starts with self-love.
I agree.
What are your thoughts on that?
I completely agree. You know, when we cultivate self-love, we radiate confidence, positivity, authenticity.
Yeah.
We become more magnetic. We attract the right people and opportunities into our lives. And we're less likely to engage in harmful behaviors, like trying to manipulate others or force outcomes that aren't in alignment with the highest good.
So how can we practically incorporate self-love into our witchcraft practice?
Yeah.
What are some tangible things we can do?
One powerful practice is, creating a regular self-care routine that nourishes our mind, body, and spirit. And that might include things like meditation or yoga or journaling. Spending time in nature, engaging in creative pursuits,
It's about making time for ourselves and honoring our own needs.
Exactly. And it's about speaking kindly to ourselves, challenging that negative self-talk and celebrating our strengths and accomplishments, recognizing our own worthiness and treating ourselves with the same love and compassion that we would offer to a dear friend.
I love that.
Yeah.
So it's not just about, bubble baths and face masks, although those are great too.
They are.
But it's about a deeper kind of self-care that really nourishes our soul.
Absolutely. And we can also incorporate, self-love into our spell work by focusing on intentions that support our own well-being and personal growth.
Yeah. So instead of trying to change someone else or manipulate a situation, we can focus on attracting abundance, healing old wounds, boosting our confidence, or strengthening our intuition.
It's about empowering ourselves from within.
It is.
Yeah.
This has been so insightful. It's amazing how interconnected everything is.
Yeah, it really is.
Our own inner work, our self-love, it all has this ripple effect on the world around us.
It really does. When we heal ourselves, we heal the world.
That's such a powerful reminder. Okay, before we move on, I want to make sure we touch on one more crucial aspect of ethical witchcraft.
Okay.
And that is respecting closed traditions.
Yeah.
We've talked about it briefly, but I think it deserves its own dedicated space in our conversation.
You're absolutely right. This is such a vital piece of the puzzle, and it's something that often gets overlooked or misunderstood, especially by those who are new to witchcraft.
So for those who may be unfamiliar with the concept, can you explain what we mean by closed traditions?
Certainly. So closed traditions are spiritual practices or systems that are not open to everyone.
Okay.
They often have specific requirements for participation, such as initiation lineage or a deep connection to a particular culture or community.
And it's so essential to respect those boundaries. Right? We can't just pick and choose practices that we find appealing without understanding their cultural context and significance.
Exactly.
Can you give us some examples of closed traditions so that our listener can kind of understand what we're talking about?
Of course. So some well-known examples are indigenous smudging ceremonies, hoodoo voodoo, and certain forms of shamanism. These traditions often have rich histories and complex belief systems that require deep cultural understanding and connection.
Yeah. So it's not about saying that these practices are off limits.
Right.
But it's about recognizing that they're not for everyone.
Exactly.
It's about respecting the lineage.
Yes.
And the cultural context of those traditions.
Exactly. And it's about acknowledging that, our own spiritual exploration shouldn't come at the expense of others.
Yeah.
Appropriating or misrepresenting closed traditions can perpetuate harmful stereotypes and erase the voices of those who hold those traditions.
So how can we as individuals ensure that we're respecting closed traditions? The article offers some helpful guidance here.
Yeah.
What are some key takeaways that you think our listeners should keep in mind?
The first step is to educate ourselves.
Okay.
If we're drawn to a particular practice, we need to do our research and learn about its origins, its cultural context and significance.
Yeah.
But we also need to be mindful of our sources.
Right.
Are we getting our information from authentic practitioners? Or are we getting it from people who might be appropriating or misrepresenting those traditions.
Yeah.
Always prioritize voices from within those communities.
So it's about being a discerning consumer of information,
Yes,
especially in the age of social media where misinformation can spread so easily.
exactly. And if we're unsure about something, it's always better to err on the side of caution and respect.
Yeah.
We can reach out to practitioners from those traditions and ask for guidance,
Mm.
you know?
That makes so much sense.
Yeah.
It's about approaching those conversations with humility
Yeah.
and a genuine desire to learn, rather than assuming that we already know everything.
Exactly.
And ultimately, respecting closed traditions is not about limiting our own practice.
Right.
It's about honoring the diversity and the richness of human spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
It's about recognizing that there are many paths to the divine, and each one deserves to be treated with reverence and respect.
Absolutely.
This whole conversation about respecting closed traditions really ties back to one of the core principles of ethical witchcraft,
Mm-hmm.
which is cultural sensitivity.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that different cultures have different beliefs, practices, and ways of relating to the sacred.
Yeah.
And it's about approaching those differences with respect and a willingness to learn,
Hmm.
recognizing that, our own cultural perspective is not the only one,
Right.
and it's certainly not superior to any other.
And it's about being aware of the harm that can be done when we appropriate or misrepresent practices from cultures that are not our own,
Exactly.
especially when those cultures have historically been marginalized or oppressed.
Right. It's about being mindful of the power dynamics at play
Yeah.
and using our privilege to amplify the voices of those who have been silenced.
This whole conversation about cultural sensitivity is so important,
It is.
and it's something that we need to be constantly mindful of in our practice.
Absolutely. It's an ongoing process of learning, unlearning, and relearning.
Yeah.
And it requires us to be humble, open-minded, and willing to challenge our own biases and assumptions.
Because ultimately, ethical witchcraft is about more than just following rules or avoiding taboos.
Right.
It's about cultivating a deep respect for all beings
Yes.
and all cultures.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing the interconnectedness of all things
Mm-hmm.
and understanding that our actions have consequences.
Exactly.
This deep dive has been incredibly insightful so far.
It has.
It's amazing how many layers there are to ethical witchcraft.
Yeah.
It's truly a holistic practice that encompasses every aspect of our lives.
It's a lifelong journey of self-discovery, connection, and service to the greater good.
As we wrap up this first part of our deep dive, I want to leave our listener with this thought. If witchcraft is about harnessing personal power,
Okay.
what does it mean to wield that power responsibly?
That's a powerful question indeed.
It is.
And it's one that deserves our continued attention and reflection as we move forward on our magical paths.
We'll delve further into that question and explore more about ethical witchcraft in part 2 of this deep dive.
Right.
Stay tuned.
I'm excited.
Me too.
Yeah, that is a powerful question.
It is. And speaking of responsible magic, one thing that really stood out to me in the article was the discussion of ethical spell work, specifically love spells.
Oh, yeah, love spells.
Right.
They're one of the most sought after spells, but also one of the most ethically complex.
Totally. Because like we talked about how trying to manipulate someone's feelings without their consent is like a huge no-no.
Right.
It feels disrespectful and also potentially harmful.
Yeah.
So where does that leave love magic then?
Yeah. Well, the article makes a fascinating point about this. It suggests that instead of trying to force someone to love you, maybe a more ethical approach to love magic is to focus on self-love.
So instead of trying to change someone else's feelings,
Yeah.
you're working on cultivating love and acceptance within yourself.
Exactly, because when you radiate self-love, you naturally attract more love into your life.
That makes a lot of sense.
It's about raising your own vibration and becoming a magnet for healthy, fulfilling relationships.
It's like that saying, you can't pour from an empty cup.
Yes, exactly.
You have to like fill yourself up with love first before you can truly share it with others.
Beautifully put. And when you think about it, self-love magic is incredibly empowering. It's about taking control of your own happiness and well-being rather than relying on someone else to complete you.
Totally. And it kind of ties into this whole idea of ethical witchcraft being about responsibility and alignment, right?
Yes.
Like you're responsible for your own energy, your own growth, and you're aligning your intentions with the highest good for yourself and others.
Precisely. And I think that's what makes ethical witchcraft so compelling. It's not just about waving a wand and getting what you want.
Right.
It's about a deeper understanding of energy intention and the interconnectedness of all things.
And speaking of interconnectedness, let's circle back to something we discussed earlier, which is the importance of building an inclusive and supportive witchcraft community.
Absolutely. Creating a welcoming and diverse community is crucial, especially given that witchcraft has historically been a place of refuge for those who have been marginalized.
The article talks about uplifting diverse voices within the community.
Yes.
What are some ways that we can actively do that?
One way is to make a conscious effort to support and amplify the work of practitioners from diverse backgrounds.
Okay.
So BIPOC practitioners, LGBTQ+ practitioners, disabled practitioners, and anyone who has been historically underrepresented within the witchcraft community.
Now, that could look like sharing their work on social media, attending their workshops, or buying from their shops.
Exactly. It's about using our platforms and our resources to help elevate those voices and make sure they're being heard.
And it's about being willing to listen and learn from those who have different experiences than our own.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we can get stuck in our own little echo chambers,
Yeah,
surrounded by people who look and think like us.
right.
But true growth comes from stepping outside of those comfort zones.
I couldn't agree more. It's about challenging our own biases and being open to new perspectives.
And it's about calling out injustice and inequality when we see it,
Yes,
both within the witchcraft community and in the world at large.
absolutely.
Ethical witchcraft isn't just about our personal practice. It's about creating a more just and compassionate world for everyone.
Beautifully said. And that brings us to another important aspect of ethical witchcraft that we touched on earlier, respecting closed traditions.
Right. We talked about how important it is to do our research and understand the origins and cultural significance of different practices, especially those that come from closed traditions.
Yes, and it's about being mindful of where we're getting our information. Are we learning from authentic sources, or are we relying on interpretations that might be skewed or disrespectful?
Right. It's about recognizing that we don't have the right to access every tradition or practice, no matter how curious we are.
Exactly. And it's okay to be drawn to a particular tradition or practice,
Yeah.
but we need to approach it with humility and respect. If a tradition is closed, it means it's not ours to take or modify for our own purposes.
So how can we navigate that curiosity in a respectful way?
Yeah.
What are some practical tips for those who might be interested in learning more about a closed tradition without crossing any boundaries?
I think the key is to approach it as a student, not a consumer.
Okay.
Seek out teachers and resources from within that tradition and be willing to listen and learn without judgment. And understand that access might not be granted, and that's okay.
Yeah, that's such a valuable piece of advice. It's
Yeah.
about respecting the autonomy and the sovereignty of those traditions.
Yes.
Recognizing that they're not just there for our taking.
Exactly. And I think it speaks to a broader theme of ethical witchcraft.
Okay.
Recognizing that our personal growth and spiritual exploration shouldn't come at the expense of others.
That's a really important point to remember.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to shift gears a bit and talk about another theme that emerged in the article,
Okay.
which is this idea that ethical witchcraft is about aligning our actions with our values, both on and off the altar.
That's such a key point. Ethical witchcraft isn't just about what we do in our rituals and spells. It's about how we live our lives every single day.
So it's about walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Precisely. It's about embodying those values of respect, compassion, integrity, and responsibility in all areas of our lives.
Can you give us some examples of what that might look like in practice?
Yeah.
How can we weave ethical principles into our daily lives?
It could be something as simple as being mindful of the language we use,
Okay.
making sure we're not perpetuating harmful stereotypes or using words that are offensive or hurtful.
Right, because words have power.
They do.
And it's about being aware of the impact our words have on others, even if we don't intend to cause harm.
Exactly. And it's about taking action to support causes we believe in.
Yep.
That could mean donating to organizations that align with our values, volunteering our time, or speaking out against injustice.
It's about using our voices and our actions to create a more just and equitable world, not just for ourselves, but for everyone.
Absolutely. And it's about being mindful of our consumption habits, choosing to support businesses that are ethical and sustainable, reducing our waste, and being conscious of our impact on the environment.
So it's really about living in a way that reflects our values.
Yes.
Aligning our actions with our intentions, not just in our magical practice, but in all areas of our lives.
Exactly.
That feels really powerful.
It is powerful because when we start living in alignment with our values, our magic becomes even stronger. Our intentions become clearer, and we're able to manifest our desires with greater ease and effectiveness.
This has been such a rich conversation.
It has.
I'm realizing that ethical witchcraft is not just about avoiding harm. It's about actively creating positive change in the world,
Yes.
both individually and collectively.
I couldn't agree more. It's about using our magic to heal ourselves, to heal our communities, and to heal the planet.
We've talked a lot about responsibility today, but ethical witchcraft is also about empowerment, right?
Absolutely.
It's about recognizing our own power and using it for good.
Ethical witchcraft is about stepping into our power, owning our magic, and using it to create a world that we're proud to be a part of.
We've covered a lot of ground in this second part of our deep dive.
We have.
Before we move on to the final part, I want to leave our listener with this thought.
Okay.
How can we as ethical witches use our magic to make a positive impact on the world? What kind of change do we want to see?
That's a great question to ponder as we continue our exploration of ethical witchcraft.
Yeah, that's a really great question to think about. How can we actually use our magic to make a difference in the world?
Right. And it can feel so big.
Doesn't it?
Right? Like, where do you even start?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I think one thing to remember is that, like, even small actions can have a big impact.
I agree.
Like we talked about earlier, being mindful of the language that we use, being conscious of the things that we buy, supporting causes that we believe in. Like,
Yeah.
those things might seem really small
They do.
on their own,
Yeah.
but collectively, they can really create a powerful wave of positive change.
Totally. It's so easy to get overwhelmed, right?
It is.
You look at the state of the world and think, like, what can I actually do?
Yeah.
But everything we do, every single action has an impact and sends a ripple out.
Yeah.
And those ripples can create huge change.
And it's not about being perfect, right?
No, not at all.
Like, we're all going to make mistakes.
We are.
We're all learning, but it's about being willing to, like, acknowledge those mistakes and keep trying to do better.
It's about progress, not perfection, right?
Exactly.
And extending that grace and compassion to ourselves as well as everyone else.
Yeah, totally. And that makes me think about something else we discussed earlier, which is the importance of community,
Yes, community is so important.
especially building an inclusive and supportive witchcraft community.
Right.
It's such an important part of using our magic for good.
It is, because when we come together, we can support each other. We can learn from each other.
Yes.
And we can work together to actually create change on a larger scale.
And we're stronger together
Absolutely.
than we are alone.
And it's about, dismantling those systems of oppression and making sure that everyone has a seat at the table.
Yeah, exactly. Ethical witchcraft is about using our power to uplift others, not to perpetuate harm or inequality.
Right. It's about creating a world where everyone can thrive, regardless of who they are or where they come from.
I think all of this ties back to, like those core principles of ethical witchcraft that we've been exploring today.
Yes.
Like respect, responsibility, integrity, compassion.
Those are the foundations
Yes.
of ethical magic.
And they remind us that, our magic is a gift,
It is.
and it's our responsibility to use it wisely.
It is.
This has been such an incredible conversation.
It has.
So eye-opening, so inspiring. It's given me so much to think about
Me too.
and so many ways to, like, deepen my own practice.
And it's a journey we're all on together, right?
Yes.
Whether you're brand new to this or you've been practicing for years,
It doesn't matter.
it doesn't matter. We all have a part to play in creating a more just and compassionate world.
Absolutely. And a more magical world.
Yes. And I think, we've talked about responsibility and we've talked about, making sure that we are being ethical, but it's also about empowerment, right?
It is.
It's about recognizing that we have this power and it can be used for good.
We do have that power.
We do.
Well, this has been such an amazing conversation.
It really has.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights and your wisdom with us today.
Oh, thank you for having me. This has been a wonderful conversation.
And to all of you listening out there, we hope this deep dive has inspired you to think critically about your own practice.
Yes.
And to use your magic in a way that aligns with your values and helps to make the world a better place.
Remember, ethical witchcraft is not about limitations.
No, it's not.
It's about empowerment. It's about recognizing the power that we all have to create positive change.
Yeah, and keep those magical minds curious. And until next time, blessed be.